For 12,000 years, the Voth Galactic Empire was the undisputed ruler of the cosmos. Their dominion covered 1,000 star systems, enforced by tens of thousands of warships. Their command was law, their power absolute. No one had ever dared to challenge them and lived to tell the tale. The Vath were convinced they were the masters of the galaxy, and for 12 millennia, they were right. On the bridge of his cruiser, the Iron Dominion, Commander Kethaval watched the starfield slide by. After 60 years of service and 3 border wars, he thought he'd seen it all. He'd put down rebellions on a dozen different worlds. Nothing got a rise out of him anymore. The universe was a simple place. The strong lead and the weak follow. It was just the natural order. His patrol group of 12 warships was babysitting the edge of Vath territory, out by the Keldon Nebula, a boring swirl of gas and dead stars. There was nothing of value out here, just empty, silent space. It was a dead-end assignment, and Kethaval hated it. "Commander," his sensor tech called out, "we've got an unidentified vessel entering our sector." Kethaval turned. "Unidentified? Tell me more." "Its design doesn't match anything in our databases, sir. It's holding a steady course right through the nebula." Kethaval's brow furrowed. Every spacefaring race in the galaxy was on file. The Voth had met them and conquered most of them. An unknown ship was impossible. "Put it on the main screen," he ordered. The viewer flickered on, showing a ship that was completely alien to Kethaval. It was big, maybe half the size of his cruiser, with a plain, dark gray hull. The design was purely functional, no frills, no markings, except for a tiny symbol on its side, a little blue and green circle. "Do we know where it came from?" Kethaval asked. The sensor officer tapped at his console, tracing the ship's path. "I'm tracking it now, Commander. Looks like it came from..." He paused, a look of pure confusion on his face. "From the Sol system." A laugh broke the silence on the bridge. It was Lieutenant Vorsoon, the weapons officer, young and full of himself like all the new recruits. "The Sol system?" Vorsoon scoffed. "Isn't that the human homeworld, those primitives who can barely get from one of their own planets to the next?" Kethaval vaguely remembered the file on humans. The Empire had stumbled upon their world 40 years ago. A survey crew noted a species still messing around with chemical rockets and basic fusion. They were slapped with a Tier 7 classification, the absolute lowest, a species so backward they weren't even worth the effort to conquer. The survey team had a good laugh at their primitive radio broadcasts and tiny orbital stations before leaving for good. Humans were a cosmic joke, a forgotten footnote in the Imperial archives. "Well, it looks like the primitives figured out how to build a real ship," Kethaval said. "How cute. Signal the fleet. We're going to intercept this little vessel and give its crew a lesson on why you don't trespass in Imperial space." The 12 Vath warships adjusted their course, moving like a pack of wolves that had just spotted a lamb. But the human ship didn't react. It didn't slow down, speed up, or change course. It just kept coming, as if a dozen warships closing in on it didn't even exist. "They probably haven't even seen us yet," Vorsoon sneered. "Their sensors are likely as pathetic as the rest of their tech." "Open a hailing frequency," Kethaval ordered. "Let's make a formal introduction." The comms officer complied. "Channel is open, Commander." Kethaval stepped forward. "Attention, unknown vessel. This is Commander Kethaval of the Vath Imperial Navy. You have illegally entered our sovereign territory. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with your immediate and total destruction. You have 30 seconds to comply." He waited, the bridge completely silent as everyone's eyes were glued to the screen. 30 seconds ticked by. The human ship did nothing. It just kept moving forward, completely ignoring the command. "Maybe they didn't understand us," the comms officer suggested. "Their translation software might be garbage." "Then we'll speak a language they will understand. Weapons," Vorsoon said, practically bouncing with excitement. "Commander, request permission to fire a warning shot." Kethaval thought about it. The ship was obviously no threat, but they had ignored a direct order. That kind of disrespect couldn't be ignored. "Permission granted," he said. Fire one plasma burst across their bow. A wide grin spread across Vorsoon's face as he armed the weapons. A searing bolt of plasma tore through the void, streaking right in front of the human ship. It was close enough to rattle their teeth and scare any normal crew half to death. The human ship didn't even flinch. It just kept its course, steady as a rock. "They're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," Kethaval muttered. "Move us in closer. I want a full sensor scan. Tell me everything about that ship." The Iron Dominion surged ahead, its escorts fanning out to box in the intruder. The sensor officer fired up the deep scan system, a piece of tech that could peel back the hull of any known ship and see what was inside. "Scanning now, Commander," the officer reported, then hesitated. The initial readings, this can't be right." "What is it?" "The hull plating. I'm not getting a proper reading. Our scanners can't seem to penetrate it." The officer cranked the power to maximum. The deep scanner whined with effort. For a tense moment, nothing. Then, data started trickling onto the screen. The officer's face went pale. His confidence evaporated, and his hands started to shake. "Commander," he said, his voice barely a whisper, You need to see this." Kethaval walked over and stared at the sensor display. At first, the readings didn't make any sense. He assumed it had to be a malfunction, but every diagnostic showed the equipment was working perfectly. The data was real. The human ship's hull was forged from a material that didn't exist in any Vath database. It was impossibly dense, with an energy signature that was completely off the charts. And deep inside the ship, where the engine core should be, the sensors detected a power source that was greater than his entire fleet's combined output. "That's impossible," Kethaval breathed. "Humans are primitives. They can't have this." "Commander," his comms officer cut in, "we're getting a transmission from the human ship." Kethaval's mouth went dry. On screen, a woman's face appeared. She had dark hair and calm, steady eyes, and wore a simple uniform with that same blue and green circle on the shoulder. She looked right at the camera without a hint of fear. "Commander Kethaval," she said, her Voth accent perfect. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Navy vessel Quiet Dawn. We apologize for the delayed response. We wanted to give you time to complete your scans." Kethaval just stared. She knew their language. She knew his name. She had let them scan her. "You're in Imperial space without permission," he managed to choke out. "That's a violation of galactic law." Captain Chen offered a small, knowing smile. "We are very aware of your laws, Commander. We've been studying them for quite some time. We aren't here to cause trouble. We're here to deliver a message." "What message?" "That message is for your Emperor and the High Council. We're on our way to your capital, and we'd very much prefer this journey to be a peaceful one." Vorsoon stormed forward, his face flushed with rage. "You dare threaten us? One little ship against 12? We'll blow you out of the sky." Captain Chen's gaze shifted to him, her expression something like pity. "Lieutenant, I would strongly advise against that." Her voice was still calm. "We have no wish to harm you, but we will defend ourselves." "Fire everything!" Vorsoon screamed, mashing the weapon controls. "Destroy them!" "Belay that order!" Kethaval yelled, but it was too late. Vorsoon had already hit the master fire command. Plasma cannons roared to life. Missiles streaked from their tubes. Beams of pure energy sliced through the darkness. 12 warships unleashed absolute hell on the tiny human vessel. And then the human ship moved. Kethaval had never seen speed like that. One instant it was there, the next it was just gone. The entire fleet's firepower ripped through empty space, and then the universe went dark. The lights on the Iron Dominion bridge sputtered and died. The engines fell silent. The weapon systems went dead. Every single system on the ship just shut down. Red emergency lights flickered on, bathing the bridge in an eerie glow. Kethaval looked at his crew, all frozen in stunned silence. "Report," he demanded. "What just happened?" His sensor officer stared at a dead console, his hands trembling. All ships are dead in the water, Commander. All 12 of them. We're completely disabled. How? What did they hit us with? I don't know, sir. There was no weapons fire, no impact, no energy surge. They just turned us off. On the main screen, the human ship reappeared, floating peacefully in space without a scratch. Captain Chen's face came back into view. Commander Kethaval, she said, her voice as calm as ever. Imagine being the most powerful empire in the galaxy, only to be completely humbled in a single instant. Your fleet, your pride, left dead in the water without a single shot fired. That's exactly what happened to Commander Keithel, and what he learned next would change the galaxy forever. Stick around to see how a species left for dead turned the tables on their arrogant bullies. A voice echoed through his ship. Your ships will regain power in approximately 2 hours. Your crews are unharmed. Your vessels are undamaged. Please inform your superiors that humanity wishes to speak with them. We will be waiting at the border. Then the transmission cut. The human ship turned and just drifted away into the blackness, moving with the eerie grace of a shark that knows it has no predators. Keithel stared after it, his hands ice cold, his heart hammering against his ribs. In 60 years of service, he'd never known fear like this. Get a message to Imperial Command, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Tell them everything. Tell them the humans are coming. His mighty warship, the Iron Dominion, just floated there, silent and helpless, as the ancient stars watched on without a care. Deep in the darkness, humanity was waiting, and the Vorath Empire was about to have its world turned upside down. Admiral Vothkor had served the Empire for more than 100 years. He'd led fleets in 6 different wars and personally conquered 32 planets. He had never, ever lost a battle. His name was a whisper of fear across the galaxy. But today, standing in the great hall of Imperial Command, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: doubt. The message from Commander Kethel had come in 3 hours ago, a garbled mess sent over emergency channels because the entire patrol fleet's communication grid had simply gone dark. The news had spread through the military's top ranks like a shockwave. Now, the most powerful officers in the Imperial Navy stood in stunned silence, desperate for answers nobody had. "Play the recording again," Admiral Vothkor commanded. A hologram flickered to life, showing the Iron Dominion's sensor logs. There was the strange ship, the readings that made no sense, and the exact moment 12 Vorath warships were completely neutralized without a single laser blast in return. The officers watched, their faces grim. For some, it was the 5th time they'd seen it. It didn't get any less terrifying. "It has to be a glitch," grumbled General Thrus, head of the 3rd Fleet. "Sensor ghosts, equipment failure. The Border Patrol is using old ships." "The equipment checked out," Vothkor shot back, his tone icy. 3 different tech teams confirmed the data. The readings are real." "Then explain them," Thrus shot back. "Humans are cavemen. They were a Tier 7 species 40 years ago, barely figuring out fusion. They were still using chemical rockets. There's no way they could have developed this kind of tech in just 4 decades. It's impossible." And yet, a quiet voice cut through from the shadows. "The evidence tells a different story." Every head in the room turned. High Minister Zelton emerged from the darkness. He was ancient, even for a Vorath, and had run Imperial intelligence longer than most of the officers had been alive. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a deep worry that made Vothkor's stomach clench. "What do you know, Minister?" Vothkor asked. Zelton slowly approached the hologram and touched a control. The image changed, displaying a brilliant blue planet hanging in space next to a single moon. 40 years ago, he began, "our survey team visited their star system. They watched humanity for 3 days, scanning their cities and their primitive little ships. They listened to their broadcasts and analyzed their technology. The final report said humans were thousands of years behind us. They were irrelevant, harmless." He tapped another control, and the view zoomed out to show their entire solar system. As per standard procedure for new species, they also left behind a spy drone. It was programmed to watch and send a report every 5 years. I remember those reports, Thrus chimed in. Nothing but static. The humans were still playing in the dirt, building a few more space stations, sending little probes to their outer planets. Nothing special. Yes, Zelton agreed. That is what the report showed. But 3 days ago, we finally retrieved the drone itself. It had gone silent 2 years ago. We figured it just broke down. We sent a ship to pick it up. He paused, and the hall became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The drone was perfectly fine. Its transmitter had been turned off on purpose. Someone had found it, figured it out, and shut it down, but they left its recordings running. The hologram shifted again, showing something that made every single officer in the room forget how to breathe. Earth and its moon were still there. But filling the space between them were shipyards. Hundreds of them, massive glowing structures, each one bigger than the largest construction facility the Vorath had ever built. And inside those shipyards, thousands of warships were being built with terrifying speed. The recording played on, showing ships launching and assembling into massive formations in the dark space beyond the moon, hiding where no one would ever think to look. They just waited, silent and still, like a pack of wolves getting ready for the hunt. The humans found our drone 23 years ago, Zelton said softly. They didn't destroy it. They didn't send it back. They took it apart. They learned our language from its logs. They learned our technology from its sensors. They learned our battle plans from its tactical files. They used our own intelligence against us. It's worse than that, Vithkor whispered. The material on that ship, our scientists analyzed it. It's based on a compound we gave up on 6,000 years ago because we couldn't make it work. The humans found our old research in the drone's archives and finished the job. General Thrus looked like he was going to be sick. How many? He choked out. How many ships do they have? Based on the footage, our analysts project humanity has built at least 8,000 warships in the last 40 years. Every single one is a match for our best ships, and many are far better. 8,000? Thrus's voice cracked. The entire Imperial Navy is only 12,000 ships. And half of those are just patrol boats and cargo haulers, Vathkor added grimly. Our actual battle fleet is only 5,000 strong. Yes, Zelton said. The humans know that too. They've studied our fleet movements. They've mapped our territories. They know exactly where our ships are and exactly how long it would take for us to respond to an attack. Admiral Vathkor felt the floor drop out from under him. Everything he knew about the galaxy, the natural order of the strong ruling the weak, was a lie. Humanity had been weak. They weren't weak anymore. Wow, he asked, his voice raw. Why build all this in secret? Because they remembered us, Zelton answered. They remembered our survey team looking down on them, dismissing them. They remembered us laughing at their little rockets and leaving without a single word of respect. They decided right then and there that no one would ever look at them that way again. Just then, a communications officer burst into the hall, his face pale. Admiral, we're getting a transmission from the human ship at the border. On screen, Vathkor ordered. The hologram changed again, and a human face appeared, the same woman from the recording. Greetings, she said, her eyes calm and steady. My name is Ambassador Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Confederacy. I've been authorized to speak on behalf of all humanity. Ambassador? Vathkor caught it instantly. She'd called herself a captain before. The military rank was just a front. This wasn't an invasion. It was a first contact. We know our sudden appearance has caused some alarm, Chen continued. That wasn't our goal. We haven't come to threaten you or make demands. We came to talk. Talk about what? Vathkor demanded. About the future, she said. About peace. About a partnership between our species. She paused for a moment. And about something else. A threat that is coming for both of us. But that's a conversation we need to have with your emperor and your high council, not over military channels. We will wait at the border for your answer. The screen went blank. The officers stood there, completely floored. General Thrus was the first to break the silence. It's a trap. They're trying to get us to let our guard down before they attack. To what end? Zelton asked calmly. They already have us outmatched. If they wanted a war, they wouldn't need tricks. They could have just rolled over us. Then what do they want? Thruz demanded. Perhaps, Zelton said, they want exactly what she said they want, to talk. Admiral Vothkor stared at the empty space where Sarah Chen's face had been. She hadn't shown an ounce of arrogance or aggression, just calm, patient strength. And that was more terrifying than any weapon he'd ever faced. We have to inform the Emperor, he said at last. This is way above our pay grade. He turned and headed for the doors, the other officers trailing behind him. On the hologram behind them, the image of Earth's massive, silent shipyards remained frozen in the air. Thousands of warships, waiting in the dark, built by a people the Empire had called primitive. All his life, Vothkor had believed that power came from force and weapons. But as he walked through the ancient halls of Imperial Command, he began to wonder if he'd been wrong all along. The humans had built a power greater than he could have ever imagined, and the first thing they did with it was ask to talk. It was the one question that broke an entire empire, the question that haunted Emperor Vorath Thurto as he prepared to face his council. What kind of species builds a fleet that could shatter galaxies and then asks for peace? Deep down, a tiny voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, these humans knew something the Vorath didn't. Something universe-altering. And the answer would change everything, so you're going to want to stick around for this. As the great doors sealed behind him, the hall went quiet. And across the unimaginable void of space, humanity waited, with a terrifying patience, for their answer. The Imperial Council chamber hadn't seen this kind of meltdown in 3,000 years. The most powerful leaders of the Vorath Empire were screaming at each other like street vendors haggling over fish. Raw fear had shredded their dignity. Blind panic had shattered their composure. The galaxy as they knew it was falling apart, and nobody had a clue how to fix it. Emperor Vorath Thurto sat on his throne watching his council implode. He was ancient now. His scales faded to a chalky gray, but his mind was as sharp as ever. In his 200 years on the throne, he'd seen it all. Wars, plagues, rebellions. He'd always found a way to protect his empire. But this was different. This was a kind of fear he couldn't even name. "We have to strike now!" Grand Marshal Kthron bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. "Every hour we wait, the humans get stronger. We need to rally the entire fleet and crush them before they get any closer." "With what fleet?" Admiral Bethor shot back. "We have 5,000 ships ready for a real fight. They have 8,000, maybe more. And their tech is light years ahead of ours. We all saw what one of their ships did to 12 of ours. One! Then we'll use our numbers," Kthron roared. "We hit them from all sides. We overwhelm them." "You'd throw away half our fleet in a fight we can't win," High Minister Zelton cut in, his voice dripping with ice. "The humans aren't idiots. They've been studying our tactics. They'll know our every move before we even make it." "So what's your brilliant plan? Surrender? Bow down to these primitives?" "They are not primitives." The voice came from the back of the chamber. All heads turned to see Scholar Yella, the oldest member of the Academy of Sciences, getting slowly to her feet. She looked frail, almost brittle, but her eyes blazed with a fierce intelligence. "They never were. We were just too arrogant to see it." She began to walk forward, her steps echoing in the stunned silence. "I've spent the last 2 days going over every scrap of data we have on humanity, their history, their culture, their development, and I've come to a conclusion that chills me to my very core." "Speak," the Emperor commanded. Yella gave a short bow. 40 years ago, when we first found Earth, we saw a species at war with itself, split into countless nations fighting over dirt and ideas. We saw their polluted world, their endless violence, and their clunky technology. We called them weak because they weren't united. We called them primitive because they hadn't even conquered their own planet. We judged them by our standards, never once stopping to think they might have their own. "What other standards are there?" Kthron sneered. "Patience, perhaps," Yella replied. "Maybe the understanding that a species can be dangerous not for what it has, but for what it can become." She tapped a control, and the central display lit up with images from Earth. Old photos and videos flickering to life showed total devastation, cities in rubble, millions dead. Humanity has fought more wars with itself than we have fought in our entire 12,000-year history, she said. They have lived through genocide, nuclear fire, and the total collapse of their environment. They have pushed themselves to the brink of extinction over and over again, always by their own doing. And every single time, they survived, they rebuilt, they learned, they got stronger. The images shifted, showing something new. Cities rising from the ashes, old enemies shaking hands, former soldiers building together, monuments not to warriors, but to peace. They remember their failures, Yella said softly. They teach their children about the darkness in their own history, hoping the next generation will choose a better way. When our scouts visited them 40 years ago, they were in the middle of their greatest change. For the first time ever, they were learning how to be united. United against us? Kthron growled. Maybe. Or maybe just united, Yella said, looking straight at the Emperor. They could have attacked us at any point in the last 10 years. They had the ships, the tech, the element of surprise, but they didn't. They sent one ship, one, to deliver a message. They disabled our patrol fleet without a single casualty. They asked to talk. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. Your Majesty, these are not the actions of a conqueror. These are the actions of a species that has learned the true cost of war and has no desire to pay it again. The chamber was utterly silent. The Emperor sat like a statue on his throne, his ancient eyes glued to the images of humanity's violent, beautiful history. You think they truly want peace? He finally asked. I think they want something, Yella answered. What that is, I can't say, but I believe we should hear them out before we doom our empire to a war we might not survive. Grand Marshal Kthron shot to his feet. This is insanity. The Empire does not negotiate with lesser species. We have never shown weakness. If we talk to the humans, every race under our rule will see it as an invitation to rebel. And if we fight the humans and lose, we won't have any territory left to worry about, Zelthan pointed out quietly. The shouting started all over again. Accusations flew like missiles. The fear in the room was so thick you could barely breathe. But then a new voice cut through the chaos. Enough! Everyone froze. A communications officer was standing at the entrance, his face as pale as a ghost. What is it? The Emperor demanded. The human ship, Your Majesty. It's moved. It's now holding its position right on the edge of our core systems. And it's not alone. He hit a control. The main display flickered. A tactical map of the border appeared. And what they saw on that map made every heart in the room stop cold. The single human ship was now one of thousands. An entire fleet had just appeared out of thin air, forming a silent wall of steel across the border. 8,000 warships in perfect formation, just waiting. They jumped, Bethor whispered, horrified. They have FTL tech we can't even detect. They moved their whole fleet and we never saw a thing. And yet they're holding their position, Yella noted. They aren't advancing. They aren't attacking. They're just waiting. Right on cue, a transmission came in. The display switched to Ambassador Sarah Chen. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, that same calm look on her face. Behind her, through a massive viewport, the human fleet stretched out like an endless ocean of stars. Your Majesty, she said, with a slight bow. My apologies for the theatrics. My government felt it was important to show you just how serious we are about this. We have no desire to use this fleet. We have no desire for war, but we needed you to understand that we are coming to you as equals, not beggars. She straightened up, her gaze locking with the Emperor's. We are asking again for a meeting. We are not here to demand or to threaten. We are here to talk. I will come to your border station alone. No weapons, no guards. I will place myself completely at your mercy as a sign of our good faith. Why, the Emperor asked, the word escaping his lips before he could stop it. You have the advantage. You could wipe us out. Why are you asking for peace? Ambassador Chen's expression softened, and a flicker of something ancient and sad crossed her eyes. "Because we have destroyed before," she said quietly. "We have burned our own cities and killed millions of our own kind. We waged wars that gave us nothing but suffering. We learned the hard way that there's no glory in conquest, no honor in destruction. There are only ashes and graves, and the crushing weight of regret." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was steel. "We didn't build this fleet to conquer you. We built it to make sure no one would ever look down on us again. We built it so that when we asked for peace, we would be heard. We didn't come here to start a war, Your Majesty. We came to end one before it ever has a chance to begin." The transmission cut out. The chamber was dead silent. 8,000 human warships hung in space, waiting for a decision. Emperor Vorath Thurto looked at his council, at the terror on their faces. He thought about 12,000 years of his empire, of conquest and dominance, of believing that strength was the power to destroy. And then he thought about a species that had learned, through unimaginable pain, that true strength was having the power to choose peace. "Send a message to the border station," he said finally, his voice echoing in the hall. "Tell the human ambassador that I will meet her personally, and tell our fleet to stand down, for now." The council erupted, but the emperor raised a single hand, and they fell silent. "I am old," he said softly. "I have ruled for 2 centuries. I have seen what war does to a people. If there is any chance at all, to avoid that fate, I'm going to take it. Prepare for the meeting." He stood from his throne and walked toward the door. Behind him, an empire stood on the brink of a new age, and out in the darkness, humanity waited, with open hands and patient hearts. Imagine being told you're nothing, just primitives, not even worth talking to. Now imagine showing up 40 years later with a fleet that blots out the stars. That's exactly what humanity did, and what happened next will change the way you think about power. So stick around. For 3,000 years, the imperial border station had been the ultimate symbol of Vorath might, a fortress floating in the silent dark between galaxies. Its guns could shatter fleets, its shields could endure sieges for months. No one was ever foolish enough to even try attacking it. But now, that mighty station was dwarfed by 8,000 human warships, hanging silently in perfect formation, their dark hulls drinking the light of distant suns. They didn't move, they didn't threaten, they just waited, like a storm choosing its moment to break. Admiral Vothkor watched them from the observation deck. His own fleet of 2,000 Vorath warships gathered behind him. They were the best ships the Empire had, pulled from every corner of their territory. And next to the human fleet, they looked like children's bathtub toys. "The Emperor's shuttle is on its way," his aide reported. "He'll reach the neutral meeting point in about 20 minutes. Vothkor just nodded, his eyes glued to the window. He couldn't look away from the human ships. Their design was brutally simple. No fancy decorations, no wasted space. Every single line was built for one thing and one thing only. They were weapons brought to life, forged by a species that knew war in a way the Vorath had thankfully forgotten. "Admiral," his aide said, his voice low, "you need to see this." He held out a data tablet. Vothkor took it, and a chill went through him. "These are readings from their flagship, the one they call the Patient Hand," the aide explained. "Our scanners finally got a peek inside its outer hull." The numbers on the screen were just impossible. The ship's power core was putting out more energy than the entire station's reactor network. Its weapons were from another dimension, and its shields, if the data was right, could take a direct blast from the station's main cannon and not even flicker. "One ship," Vothkor whispered, his voice catching. "One of their ships could destroy this entire station." "Yes, Admiral, and they brought 8,000 of them." Vothkor handed the tablet back. His hands were rock steady, but inside, a lifetime of certainty had just shattered. His belief in the unbeatable Vorath Empire was crumbling with every impossible number he saw. In the quiet space between the two massive fleets, two small shuttles met. One was a grand Vorath vessel, carrying Emperor Vorath himself and his honor guard. The other was a plain human transport with no guns in sight. It carried just one person, Ambassador Sarah Chen. They both docked at a tiny neutral platform built just for this occasion. The Emperor stepped out first, flanked by 20 of his most elite soldiers, dressed in the ancient, heavy gold and crimson armor of his ancestors, a symbol of 12,000 years of rule. Ambassador Chen emerged all by herself. She wore a simple gray uniform with no medals or weapons. She walked right toward the Emperor, her steps even and calm, not a trace of fear on her face. She stopped at a respectful distance and gave a slight bow. "Your Majesty," she said. "Thank you for seeing me." The Emperor looked her over. She was so small compared to a Vorath, fragile-looking. Her life was probably a blink of an eye compared to his, and yet she stood there looking at him, not like a servant to a king, but like an equal. "You've certainly made an impression, Ambassador," the Emperor said, his voice deep. "My empire hasn't felt a tremor like this in 3,000 years. "That wasn't our goal, Your Majesty," she replied smoothly. "Fear leads to bad choices. We wanted to have a clear conversation without all that noise." "And the 8,000 warships are just for emphasis, I suppose?" "The 8,000 warships are here because you wouldn't have listened otherwise," she said, her eyes locking with his. "When your scouts visited Earth 40 years ago, they laughed at us. They called us primitives. They left without a word of greeting, trade, or diplomacy. They wrote us off as being beneath you." The Emperor didn't say anything. He remembered that report. He remembered signing off on it, agreeing with the dismissive conclusion. He hadn't given humanity a second thought since that day. "We got the message," Chen went on. "We learned that in your galaxy, the weak get ignored and the strong get a seat at the table. We understood that if we wanted you to hear us, we had to earn it. So we built, we learned, we prepared. And now, we're here, ready to talk as equals." Grand Marshal Kethron, a hot-headed warrior who had come with the Emperor, stomped forward. "Equality? You've been flying between stars for a few decades. Equality is earned over thousands of years." "No," Chen said, her voice never rising. "We demonstrated our power to make sure our words would be heard. We're not asking for equality. We're asking for you to understand." She looked back at the Emperor. "Your Majesty, I have a request. It might sound crazy after this show of force. All we ask is that you watch what our fleet does next, and then just listen to us." "Watch what?" the Emperor asked. "A demonstration," she replied. "With your permission, I'll have our fleet fire on your station." The Emperor's guards instantly aimed their weapons. Kethron whipped out his sword, but the Emperor raised a hand to stop them. "You want to attack my station? To prove you can destroy us?" "No, Your Majesty," she said. "To prove that we could, but we won't." Something in her tone, a deep sadness he couldn't place, made him hesitate. "Proceed," he commanded. Chen tapped a small device on her wrist. "All ships, execute pattern 7, single volley." Back on the station's bridge, Admiral Vathkor saw the human fleet ignite. 8,000 ships moved as one, their weapon ports glowing with a hum so deep it seemed to vibrate right through the hull and into his bones. "All hands brace for impact," he roared. "Shields to maximum!" Then the humans fired. It was a perfectly synchronized storm of light and energy, beams brighter than suns, projectiles faster than thought, waves of power that could shatter planets. The station's shields flared as they absorbed the first volley, then the second, and then it was over. The bombardment stopped. The station was fine. The shields held. The hull was unscratched. Vathkor stared at his screens, completely baffled. "They missed," he breathed. "Every single one of them missed." "No, Admiral," his sensor officer whispered, his voice trembling. "They hit us. Every shot landed. Their weapons were tuned to the exact level our shields could take. They calculated our defenses down to the single joule and matched their attack perfectly. They hit us with everything they had, but they fine-tuned it to do 0 damage." The truth washed over Vathkor like an icy tidal wave. The humans hadn't failed. They had sent a message. They had shown they could touch the station without breaking it. They could literally choose with absolute precision who lived and who died, and in that moment, they had chosen to let them live. On the platform, Ambassador Chen watched the Emperor's face as the reports flooded his earpiece. She saw the shock, the disbelief, and then the slow, dawning realization. The fear in his eyes melted away, replaced by something that looked a lot like awe. "If we wanted you gone," she said softly, "you would be. Your station, your fleet, this empire. We ran the numbers. We know exactly how this war would play out." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to an almost intimate level. "We spent 40 years becoming capable of total annihilation. And then we spent another 40 years learning restraint. Because we've been destroyers before, Your Majesty. We've torched our own planet. We've slaughtered our own kind. We know what victory tastes like, and it tastes like ash." She reached out and gently placed a hand on his armored arm. It was a gesture so bold it would have been an executionable offense just moments before. "We came here with the power to conquer you," she said. "But instead, we're giving you something else, a choice. We can work together, or we can go to war. We can be partners, or we can be enemies. We will respect your decision. But we needed you to know that when we offer peace, it's not because we're weak. We're not begging. We're offering." The Emperor was silent for a long time. His guards were frozen. Grand Marshal Kethron looked like he was about to have a stroke. But the Emperor had lived for 300 years. He knew the truth when he heard it. "Why?" he finally asked. "You have this incredible power. Why offer peace?" Ambassador Chen gave him a sad, knowing smile. "Because power isn't everything, Your Majesty. We learned that the hard way, in the ruins of our cities and on the graves of our children." She looked at him, and for a second he saw the weight of all of human history in her eyes, every war, every tragedy, and every painful step toward being better. "We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to live in it, and there's something else. Something is coming from the dark spaces, something that threatens all of us, and we'd much rather face it with friends at our side. But we'll get to that later. For now, I just have one question for you. Are you willing to listen?" The Emperor stared at her, his eyes unreadable. After a long, tense moment, he finally turned to his personal guard. "Lower your weapons," he ordered, his voice echoing in the chamber. "And get the council on the line. Tell them I'm heading back to the capital, and the ambassador is coming with me." He turned his gaze back to Chen. "It looks like we have a lot to talk about, Ambassador. I hope, for both our sakes, you're telling the truth." "So do we, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice steady. "So do we." And with that, they walked towards the shuttle, a vessel that would carry them to the very heart of the Vorith Empire. Two species, worlds apart in biology and history, now bound by a single unexpected thread, hope. The Imperial throne room wasn't just a room. It was the most sacred space in the entire Vorith civilization. The walls themselves were carved from the bedrock of their long-lost homeworld, a place that now existed only in memory. The ceiling soared so high it vanished into darkness, and the floor was a mosaic etched with the name of every emperor who had reigned over 12,000 years of unbroken history. Ambassador Sarah Chen strode through this ancient hall with the formidable Emperor Barath of Frink walking right beside her. Trailing behind them, the entire Imperial Council followed in a state of stunned, absolute silence. And there, at the end of the hall, sat the throne, a massive seat of power from which every major decision in their long history had been made. This meeting had been the Emperor's idea, and his alone. He needed his council to hear what this human had to say. He needed them to begin to see what he was just starting to grasp himself. Chen came to a stop before the throne, turning to face the assembled lords and ministers of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. She stood completely alone, having waved off any offers of guards or protection. Here she was, in the heart of Vorith power, armed with nothing but her words. "You wanted to know why we're asking for peace," she began, her voice clear and strong. You wanted to understand why a species with the power to conquer would choose a different path. I'm going to tell you. But to do that, I first need to tell you a story about a place called Earth. She tapped a small device on her wrist, and a holographic image flickered to life above her, showing a swirling world of blue and green, beautiful and delicate against the vast blackness of space. 300 years ago, she said, humanity almost wiped itself out. We created weapons that could literally crack our own planet. We raised armies so vast they stretched across entire continents. We split ourselves into factions, into nations and beliefs, and we convinced ourselves that our differences were worth dying for. The hologram shifted, the beautiful blue marble replaced by horrific scenes. Cities engulfed in flames, mushroom clouds blooming like deadly flowers over once green landscapes, and bodies lying forgotten in the streets. We fought wars that claimed hundreds of millions of lives. We choked our skies, poisoned our waters, and scorched our land. We came within a few short hours of ending everything. And for what? For pride, for fear, for the simple, arrogant belief that our way was the only way. The council members watched, their usual composure gone. They'd read the intelligence reports on human aggression, but to see it laid bare like this was something else entirely. This wasn't just data. These were real moments, real lives lost, real consequences. And then we stopped, Chen said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Not because we suddenly became enlightened. We stopped because we were standing in the ashes of everything we had built. And we finally felt the crushing weight of it all. We looked at the graves of our own children and had to ask ourselves if any cause, any belief, any scrap of land was worth that price. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. The answer was no. And that's when we started to change. It took generations. It took unbelievable sacrifice and painful compromises. But the hardest part of all was forgiveness. We had to forgive our enemies for what they did to us, and just as hard, we had to forgive ourselves for what we had done. We had to build something brand new from the wreckage of the old. DS6. She looked the Emperor directly in the eye. When your scouts found us 40 years ago, we were right in the middle of that change. We weren't a primitive species, Your Majesty. We were a species in recovery. We were healing. And when we saw the way your people looked at us, with such contempt, such dismissal, it made us realize something vital. She stood up a little straighter, her voice ringing with newfound strength. We realized the galaxy still played by the same old deadly rules we had nearly destroyed ourselves to escape. The strong crush the weak, the powerful take whatever they want, and violence is the only language that earns respect. We looked at your great empire, and we saw our own reflection staring back at us, the reflection of a past we had fought tooth and nail to leave behind. DS7, Grand Marshal Catherine, a towering figure in military dress, stepped forward, his face a mask of fury. That's an insult. The Vorith Empire has brought order to 1,000 worlds. We put an end to countless war. We created stability. Yes, you did, Chen agreed without missing a beat. You did it with force, with conquest, by making everyone else so afraid of you that they wouldn't dare step out of line. That's one way to make peace, I'll give you that. But it's not the only way. And it's a peace that's built on sand. She turned to face him head on. Your subject species don't follow you out of respect. They follow you because they're terrified. The second you show a single sign of weakness, they will turn on you. The moment a bigger power comes along, your empire will shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. You've built a civilization on fear, Marshal, and fear is a foundation that always, always crumbles. She stared the Emperor down, unflinching. 40 years ago, when your explorers stumbled upon us, we were in the middle of a great change. You called us primitive, Your Majesty, but you were wrong. We weren't primitive. We were recovering. We were healing and rebuilding from the ashes. And when we saw the pity and disgust in your people's eyes, it taught us a valuable lesson. She stood a little taller, her voice ringing with conviction. We realized the galaxy operated on the same brutal rules we had nearly wiped ourselves out trying to escape. The strong crush the weak, the powerful seize whatever they desire, and violence is the only language that earns respect. When we looked at your vast empire, we saw a mirror image of our own terrifying past, a past we fought tooth and nail to leave behind. Grand Marshal Catherine took a threatening step forward. That's an insult. The Vorath Empire has brought order to 1,000 systems. We have put an end to countless wars and created an era of stability. Oh, I agree, she said calmly. You did it with force, with conquest, by making everyone so terrified of you they wouldn't dare fight back. That's one way to get peace, sure, but it's not the only way, and it's a peace that's built on a house of cards. She turned to face him squarely. The species you rule don't follow you out of respect. They obey you because they're afraid. The very second you show a hint of weakness, they will turn on you. The moment a bigger fish comes along, your empire will shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. You built a civilization on fear, and fear is a foundation that is guaranteed to crumble. Catherine's hand instinctively went to the weapon at his side, but the Emperor's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Let her speak, Marshal. I want to hear the rest of this. Chen gave a slight, grateful bow of her head. Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm not saying these things to offend you. I'm saying them to warn you. Because there is something coming that fear can't stop. The hologram shifted again. This time, it showed a map of the galaxy, but from one edge, a creeping dark shadow was spreading like a stain. Our astronomers first saw it 30 years ago. We call it the Hollow. It's a wave of nothing, of destruction, and it's moving towards our galaxy from the empty void between the stars. We don't know what it is, a freak of nature, an ancient weapon, or some alien force we can't even begin to comprehend. All we know for sure, she continued, as nervous whispers filled the throne room, is that it's coming, and it will be here in roughly 200 years. To a civilization that was 12,000 years old, 200 years felt like tomorrow. Our scientists have run every possible simulation, Chen said. If the Hollow gets here and finds our galaxy divided and fighting, the outcome is brutally simple. We will all be extinguished one civilization at a time. Even your mighty empire with all its fleets will fall. Even humanity with all our advanced technology will fall. Standing alone, none of us are strong enough. She let that horrifying thought sink in. But together, we might just have a chance. Our combined resources, our shared knowledge, our united strength. Together, we might actually survive what's coming. That, Your Majesty, is why we built our fleet. Not to conquer you, not to threaten you, but to make sure that when we came to you offering a partnership, you would be willing to take us seriously. The Emperor slowly rose from his massive throne. He descended the steps, one by one, until he was standing directly in front of the human ambassador. She seemed so small, so fragile next to his towering form, and yet she didn't even blink. You're asking us to trust you, he rumbled, to believe that a species we just met is offering genuine cooperation, to accept that this unbelievable threat is real and that an alliance is our only hope. I'm asking you to consider it, Chen replied calmly, to look at our claims, to check our data for yourselves and then to make your own choice. We don't need an answer today. We've already waited 40 years. We can wait a little longer. And what if we say no? The Emperor challenged. What if we decide the Empire will face this threat alone? Chen's expression remained perfectly composed. Then we will defend ourselves if you attack us, and we will prepare for the Hollow by ourselves. We will not force you to cooperate. To do that would make us the very conquerors we refuse to be. She took a quiet breath. But I truly hope you won't say no. I hope that when you look at what we've done, building a fleet purely for defense, showing our power without destroying anything, coming to you with open hands instead of raised weapons, you'll see something worth believing in. We're offering you something this galaxy has never seen before, Your Majesty. A true partnership between equals, a future built on working together, not on conquering each other. The great throne room fell completely silent. Every single eye was locked on the Emperor. His next words would decide the fate of trillions. He thought about the 12,000 years of his empire. He thought of the endless species his ancestors had brought to heal, the worlds they had taken, the power they had hoarded. He thought about that foundation of fear Chen had described, and in his heart, he knew she was right. He had seen for himself how quickly loyalty vanished when power wavered. And then he thought of the hollow, that silent, creeping shadow coming to swallow everything they had ever built. "I have been emperor for 200 years, he said at last. "I have made choices that have affected the lives of trillions, but I have never, ever faced a choice like this." He turned to his council. "We have two roads in front of us. We can hold on to the old ways, domination, fear, and standing alone. We can pretend that nothing has changed and just hope that both the humans and the hollow simply go away. Or we can take a leap of faith. We can dare to trust that these humans are exactly who they say they are. We can build something new together." He turned back to face Chen. "I choose the second path. I choose an alliance, not because I trust you completely, I don't, but because I saw what you were capable of, and you chose not to do it. That decision, that restraint, that is something I haven't seen in 12,000 years of galactic history. It's something worth taking a chance on." He held out his massive hand in the human gesture of greeting, a custom his advisors had briefed him on. "Welcome to the Vorith Empire, Ambassador. Let's go build something better together." Chen took his hand, her grip surprisingly firm and warm. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I promise you will not regret this." 1 year later, the galaxy was a place no one could have recognized. Human and Vorith fleets flew side by side in joint training missions. Scientists from both species worked together, sharing breakthroughs in technologies, and the Empire's subject species, once ruled by fear, were given a new offer: not subjugation, but partnership; not obedience, but cooperation. Some worlds chose to stay, while others declared their independence. And for the first time in 12,000 years, nobody was punished for their decision. The newly formed joint fleet patrolled the outer territories, a shield against pirates and a bulwark against the approaching hollow. Its human captain, James Chen, Sarah's nephew, stood on the bridge, watching the star-dusted canvas slide by. Next to him, a Borith officer named Vathkor the Younger, son of the very admiral who first saw the human fleet arrive, analyzed the tactical charts. He'd been raised on stories of that day, the shock, the fear, and the impossible decision that came after. "Do you really think we can stop it?" Vathkor asked quietly. "The hollow, I mean," he clarified. "Are we actually strong enough?" Captain Chen mulled it over. "I honestly don't know," he said. "Nobody does. But I know this for sure. Just 1 year ago, our two species were on the brink of annihilating each other. Today, we're standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to face the darkness as allies. No matter what happens next, that right there is already a victory." He glanced at the ships surrounding them, Vorath and human vessels flying in perfect formation, their crews a single unified team. "My aunt always said that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our tech or our warships. It was our capacity to change, to look at our own worst instincts and choose a better path. Maybe that's what will get us through this. It won't be the weapons we've built, but the conscious choice we've made to use them for defense instead of domination." Vathkor nodded, processing it. "Your kind is peculiar, human. You have the power to rule, yet you choose to cooperate. You possess the strength to destroy, yet you choose to show mercy. I can't say I completely understand it." Captain Chen offered a small smile. "Sometimes, neither do we. But we never stop trying. And that's all any of us can really do." The fleet surged forward into the void, its engines painting trails of light across the endless black. Behind them, 1,000 worlds held their breath, caught between hope and fear. Ahead, the great unknown was waiting. But for the first time, they weren't facing it alone. Human and Vorath standing together. Old enemies had become trusted allies. Two civilizations, both scarred by their own violent histories, were now reaching for a future that neither could have built on their own. And somewhere out in the silent abyss between galaxies, the Hollow continued its relentless march. It didn't understand fear. It didn't know mercy. It knew only how to consume and how to spread darkness. But for the first time in billions of years, something new stood in its way. Something that had learned how to turn swords into shields and enemies into friends. Something that had decided, against every instinct in all of history, to put its faith in the possibility of peace. Humanity had finally arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.